Fly tying made clear and simple with Skip Morris. Skip has written 3 books and numerous magazine articles on the art of fly tying. He has taught fly tying at sportsmen's expositions, fishing clubs, and fly shops. Over the next 2 hours, Skip will show you how easily you can tie your own flies.
Fly tying. How tough can it be? Well, it can be very tough if you're starting out on your own, you have poor instruction or no instruction, and you're just sort of guessing your way through it. That can be a very slow process. But if you have good instruction, you'll be surprised how quickly you can tie good-looking fish-catching flies. I've seen rank beginners within the period of only a half hour or an hour of practice with good instruction tie good fish-catching flies, and that's not much time invested. Well, over the next couple hours, I'd like to give you the benefit of my years of experience as a fly tyer and give you the best instruction I possibly can and make it just as clear and simple as I can make it. The first thing we want to look at are the tools that are required for fly tying. Now, there's some tools that are not required. I'll call those optional tools. These are the essential tools. You're going to need a fly tying vise. There's no way around it. Now, you don't need 3 of them, but these are 3 different kinds of vises, and I'd like to tell you a little bit about each one. This is the simplest. This is called a stationary vise. As you can see, it's not moving. It's stationary. And it doesn't move either, beyond just moving the jaws like this to open or close them. This is a vise that stays in one position, but it is a good, solid vise. I tied on one for 20 years, and I never had a complaint about it. This is also the least expensive way to get a good fly tying vise. This vise is called a rotary vise, and it has this option. You can rotate the jaws and the hook so you can tie from different angles. If you're looking at this side of the fly and you're wondering what's going on the other side, you can turn over and take a look. Or if you need to add something to the underside of the fly, well, rather than try to do this, you can just turn it over and keep tying the way you were tying. This is going to be a more expensive vise, but it has some advantages you can really learn to love. This is a little different kind of rotary vise. There are a number of designs for this, but you'll notice it has this angle here, which allows you to keep the hook on a horizontal axis as you tie. So as you rotate the vise, you'll notice that the hook just stays right in the same axis. So instead of rotating the hook with the thread, you can actually make the hook spin and keep the thread feeding from the same place. That's a nice option. Now, this vise and this vise are both base-mounted vises. They have this heavy, wide base down here, also called a pedestal. And the nice thing about the pedestal, again, that's more expensive than the other kind, but the pedestal allows you to lift up the vise, move it anywhere you want, set it on any table, and not have to worry about gouging the table with the jaws of the mount. These are both pedestal vises. They're not quite as solid or secure as a C-clamp vise. This is a C-clamp vise. This is typical of the clamps that are used. You'll see that it has a tightening knob here in order to, you put the stem of the vise into there and tighten that, and then this tightens to the table, just as you see this one is mounted. And it is more solid, it's just not quite as mobile. Here are some of the things that you're looking for in a vise. Your vise must have these qualities if you're going to be happy tying with it. First of all, the jaws should open and close without too much difficulty. You don't want to have to be wrestling with that. And it should be able to hold quite a wide range of hooks securely. Now, there are some extremely small and extremely large hooks it may not handle, but for the most part, most hooks should fit in this vise just fine. The vise shouldn't be flimsy or rattly. It has to be good and solid. It has to be secure. The other thing you're looking for is plenty of tying access. That is, when you're working on the fly, tying on the hook, you want to be able to move around the hook and get plenty of access to it. You don't want the jaws of the vise to be big and bulky and in your way all the time. The other thing you're looking for is a secure hook hold. Notice that when I push on this hook, the hook bends, but it doesn't move in the vise. Now I should be able on most hooks to actually deform the hook, bend it out of shape before the vise will let go of it. You don't want the vise to be extremely tight or it may fracture or weaken the hook, but it should have a good, firm hook hold. The next thing you'll need are fly tying scissors. Now there are all kinds of scissors. They all look about the same. Just have to have enough room for your fingers in the loops. And you want fly tying scissors that cut well and cut easily. Now that may sound obvious, but a number of them don't. The ones I like most have tiny serrations. You can barely even see them. And what those do is to hold on to the material you're trying to cut so that the material doesn't slide down and out of the jaws as you're trying to close the jaws. You also want a fine point on the scissors, and you want the scissors to be nice and tight and not loose. Don't skimp there. Scissors are reasonably priced. Get good ones. You're going to need at least one thread bobbin. Now this is a conventional thread bobbin, and there was a time when we tied without bobbins, but it was really frustrating because the thread would unwrap the minute you let go of it. The bobbin's weight holds the thread down. You've got to have a bobbin, and it's got to be a good one. They're not expensive. You're going to need hackle pliers, especially when you're tying dry flies. Here's the classic hackle plier. That's the English hackle plier. Very simple, all metal. And there are just a great diversity of other styles, and a lot of different tyers like different kinds of hackle pliers. They all have their following. This is a teardrop type, and it's just a spring of metal. I like hackle pliers to have this loop, and even though some tyers advise against it, I usually put my finger in there and I wrap a hackle with my finger in the loop. Speaking of hackles, one thing that's really handy is a hackle gauge. Now this is, some people would say it's optional, but I really think this is essential. Hackle gauge makes it so much easier to tell how long the fibers are on a feather called a hackle, which are commonly used for dry flies, but often used for other types of flies. This is one kind which mounts in the vise jaws, like this. And the other kind is like this. It just sits right on the vise, so it's always there. Whichever you prefer, go ahead and get it. Now, a material holder, I consider that an essential tool. Some people would say no. I've said no and I've said yes, but now I say yes. When you're tying, you've got lots of material streaming back off your fly, and if you can pop those materials into the coils of this little spring material holder, you can keep a whole bunch of materials out of your way. Now, there's another kind of material holder which is just a little clip. The problem with a clip is you have to put everything in the right order, because when you go to pull it out, it has to come out in the right order. So I prefer the spring type, like this or like this. Another thing you're going to have is a light, some kind of adjustable lamp that will pour a lot of light right down on top of the hook. There are all kinds of these. Some are made especially for fly tying. You don't need one that's specially made for fly tying as long as it does the job. One like this is just fine. It's got an adjustable arm. You just bring it right down over your work from the rear of the vise, and that will pour a lot of light down and make it very easy for you to tie without ruining your eyes. Hair stacker, very useful tool. The hair goes in this end, tips first. Tap the stacker a few times. The hair all comes down against the cap so that when you remove the cap, the hair is right in here and it's all even. All the ends are together. Now let's take a look at some of the optional tools. Some of these are really handy, and frankly I wouldn't tie without them, but technically they are optional. Another tool that if you have one you will use frequently is a bodkin. All that a bodkin is a needle in a handle. So you can use, I sometimes use a hat pin, or I will actually mount a needle in a little piece of wood, a little dowel. This is a bodkin, and you can use it for all kinds of things, you'll see. I've mentioned being able to see your work when you're tying. And here's something that will help a great deal, and that's some kind of magnifier. Now, I used to consider these optional, and I still do. But I consider them not optional for me. Now that I'm in my 40s, it seems like more and more I use magnifiers, and boy, I'll tell you, they make a world of difference. But even if you don't want to use magnifiers for most of your tying, we tie an awful lot of tiny flies these days because that's what catches fish a lot of times. And magnifiers can really help you do that. These are just reading glasses, and anywhere from about 2.5 to 3.5 power is good. That's a easy way to go, inexpensive. This is called a binocular magnifier. This is a professional one used by jewelers. They're surprisingly inexpensive. They have an adjustable band to fit your head, and then you just slip these on. This is my favorite magnifier. And then when you don't want them, you just flip the magnifiers up. When you want them, you flip them down. And one of the things I really like about these is they're always with you wherever you go, whatever angle you're looking at. Some of the fixed magnifiers, of course, just look at one angle, or you have to constantly be adjusting them or moving them. So I really like the binocular magnifier. The other thing I like about them is that if you wear conventional glasses, you can wear your glasses and still use the binocular magnifier. So again, this is my favorite, but there are lots of good magnifiers, and each seems to have its following. And then we have toothpicks, one of my favorite tools. These are not very expensive. And these are the round, sharp-pointed toothpicks. And these work just great for a variety of things. You can use them for picking out dubbing or for adding the cement that holds the whole fly together. All kinds of things. I use these all the time. I buy a couple of boxes a year, and that's all I need. Real cheap. And then for the bobbin, we have the bobbin threader, which I'm a little cautious about recommending. Some people say that these metal bobbin threaders will actually score or damage the inside of the bobbin tube. If you just take a little bit of leader material, a little bit of monofilament, fold it over tightly, and push it down the tube, you can use that. And I'll show you another method in just a little bit for getting that bobbin threaded. Now, wing burners are a lot of fun to play with. There aren't a whole lot of flies that call for shaped wings, but they're fun to have, and they're fun to mess around with. You just put the feather in here and then burn around the outside, and you have the shape of the wing. So if you want to play around with these and have some fun, or you particularly like the flies that use cut wings or shaped wings, then you'll probably find these handy. Finally, we have a tool called a whip finisher. Kind of a strange looking tool. And that's not why I don't use it, though. I don't really care whether it looks strange or not. But I just find that I can do the job that this does with my bare fingers a lot easier. It's one less tool to pick up and put down, and I just don't use it. But a lot of guys swear by them and really like them. It creates a knot called a whip finish, which is the standard knot for finishing off a fly. Now here's a tool, if you want to call it a tool. It's a piece of machinery. This is a coffee blender. And the coffee blender is also called a dubbing blender. And what you do is you put different furs in there, which we call dubbings because we use them in a technique called dubbing. Anyway, that doesn't matter now. You put the furs in there, different colors or different types, and this, you give it a couple of whizzes, and then you pull that fur out and it's all blended together. They work great. You can also use a wet blender, kind you make milkshakes with and that sort of thing, but you have to dry out the fur, and then you have to wait for it, and you have to try to pick it out of there, and it's all wet, and the next guy who makes a milkshake gets a little bit of fur in it, and it's not a hit with the family, but it does work. The dubbing twister is a handy tool, And you don't use the technique that requires it terribly often, but when you need it, it's really handy. Now, a good substitute for a dubbing twister is just a paper clip straightened out on one end, and that works quite well. There are all kinds of dubbing twisters. This is a good one. This is one that's a little different. Still got that hook in the end. And when you twist dubbing, you twist it in a loop of thread, which we call a dubbing loop. Dubbing, and we got loop, so we got dubbing loop. Anyway, this is my favorite way to twist a dubbing loop. This is a dubbing twister, but it's also called a dubbing whirl. And it's kind of heavy and it's balanced, and you just get it into that loop of thread and spin it. That's all you have to do. Just hook it over your finger and bzz. I'll show you that a little bit later, but that's my favorite, but they all work just great. I really like to have a pair of scissors around that I can be rough with. Your good scissors, you want to take care of the tips. Really keep them sharp and protect that sharpness. But with old scissors, you don't need to worry. So if you're cutting something really stiff like wire or lead or a number of things that we use, old scissors are just great for that. If you can't get old ones, you can use fingernail clippers, which work fairly well, or you can get a very cheap pair of scissors for this work. You're going to need something to crimp down the barbs on hooks. I like to have a small pair of pliers like this, some kind of flat nose pliers, because a lot of places require barbless hooks, and frankly I'd like to see everybody using them anyway in order to protect the fish that we release. And those are the tools, both optional and essential, that we use in fly tying. If we were to go over all the materials used in fly tying, we'd use the rest of this tape and more. But we don't need to do that because there's a certain number of materials that are commonly used and a large number that are not commonly used. We will also be going into more detail about these materials and how they're used as we tie the flies. But before we do that, let me just give you a quick overview of fly tying materials. We use a variety of fly tying threads. The standard threads are 8/0 and 6/0. Those are kind of the all-around trout threads, and medium to light to heavy fly threads. Just not the extremes. Personally, I prefer the 8/0. They're interchangeable essentially. 3/0 is great for heavy flies, and from there it probably looks about the same, but when you work with it, you'll feel a difference. It's a heavier thread. Single strand flies can be used as thread, and I'll show you some ways to use it. It makes wonderful thread, even though it's basically a body material. And once in a while, size A rod winding thread can be used. If you want a really heavy fly tying thread, that's a good one. Now, we often use lead to weight our flies, and this comes in a variety of sizes. Different companies market different ways, but if you get something in about the middle, that will be the most versatile. Then there are also the tinsels, and there's wire, gold wire and silver wire. There's copper wire, which has a more subdued appearance. Round tinsel and flat tinsel. We often call the round tinsel oval tinsel, even though I think it's round actually. And we use a variety of glues and fixatives. Now most of the time you just need one head cement, and that's all most people use. This is my favorite, and that is epoxy glue, 2-part epoxy glue. This is really tough. And really, again, you only need one head cement. Tough film toughens up feathers when you spray it on there. It's an artist's fixative. And Dave's Flex Cement, handy stuff, and it can be used as head cement. Wax is great to have for fly tying because thread is normally waxed or unwaxed, but you can control the amount of wax if you have this because you can just add it as you choose. Here's an unusual tinsel that actually comes as a piping. You can tie that in or do a variety of things with that. Now one of the feathers that's very commonly used in fly tying is a hackle. And probably the most commonly used hackle is the dry fly hackle. That comes off a rooster. And this is what the neck looks like. That's a grizzly neck. And these are really handy. These are used all the time in dry flies. Brown neck, blue dun, which is sort of a bluish gray, black, ginger. Here's an unusual one. This is barred ginger. And then you get into saddle hackles, which come from the rump of the bird rather than the neck. See, this is called a dry fly neck or cape. Now these are very long, and I'll talk more about these when we get to dry flies. But they're often used for dry flies, but they can be used for other things too. Now we get into the hen hackles. Hen hackles are softer than dry fly hackles and more absorbent. So they're good for sunk flies like nymphs and streamers. This is the neck, a hen neck, and here's the rump or the saddle. And these are even softer than the neck hackles. These are really soft and move a lot in the water. Now this is called a rooster neck or a variety of things. It's just basically it is a rooster neck like a dry fly hackle neck, but it's a different neck. I don't really know the details, but I know that it's got a different, wider, webbier feather, and it's used a lot of times in streamers and bass bugs and so forth. Now other feathers include hurls, which are, this is ostrich hurl, and this is peacock hurl. Peacock is used in a lot of flies, popular stuff. And we have pheasant tail, which is used all the time. Here's a natural pheasant tail, and here's one that's been dyed dark brown. By the way, most of these materials can be dyed to a variety of colors. Continuing with feathers, here's a variety of different feathers. Now we have a little bit of partridge there, very popular, used a lot. Dyed guinea, interesting looking feather. And we have teal, which is sort of a barred black and white. And here's some dyed marabou, very soft stuff, really moves in the water. It comes in all kinds of colors, as most of these do. Turkey flat, got a whole bunch of them here. Here's natural guinea. And here's a new feather that's, well, it's not new. It's been around as long as ducks have. It comes from the back end of a duck, and it's called a CDC feather. It's got some interesting properties, and it's kind of popular right now. We'll see how long it lasts, but it may endure. And these are called goose biots. They're used for tails. Another feather that is used a lot in wings are primaries. This is a duck primary, and this is a mottled turkey primary. And those little sections make great wings or wing cases or all kinds of different things. And we use all kinds of fur in fly tying in a variety of ways, but mostly we spin it around thread to make fly bodies. Here's just a few of them. We have red fox, and otter, and badger, and these are all the natural furs. There are some synthetics that are used in place of these. Woodchuck, badger, hare's mask. This one is dyed a rather subtle color, as you can see. And we have hare. Lots of different uses for hare, wings, tails, different things. This is bucktail. It's used all the time. It can be dyed. Here's squirrel tail. And then we have the hollow hares. There's all kinds of hollow hares, and they can be used for all kinds of things. This is deer hair, natural deer hair. This is elk hair, which looks similar to deer hair, but it's actually coarser and tougher. And then we have caribou hair, which is fluffier, and it is not nearly as tough as either of those. Here's something that's not used too often, but sometimes, elk mane. And, of course, we have the moose family. Here's moose body and moose mane. The last natural material that I'd like to talk about is wool yarn. That's used a lot in sinking flies and nymphs and so forth. Now, synthetic materials are really hot, and they're getting hotter because there are things that you can do, of course, with natural materials you can't do with synthetics, and things you can do with synthetics you can't do with natural materials. Now, here's another kind of yarn. This is poly yarn. And polypropylene is also used to make various kinds of dubbing. Now, here's a kind of dubbing that's similar to poly. I'm not even sure what it is, to be honest. There's so many of them out there, but that's a synthetic, real fine. And here's another one called Antron that's kind of sparkly. And this is useful for dubbing, again, just like the furs. And then we have different kinds of ribbing material. This is larva lace. This is kind of stretchy stuff. Makes a nice gelatinous look, as does swanendays. You can get this in all kinds of colors and a variety of sizes. great rib material for nymphs and various things. And we also have what is sometimes called rubber hackle. As you can see, rubber hackle bears a little resemblance to hackle. So I'd rather call it rubber strands or rubber legs because it's usually used as legs. You can get it in different colors and different sizes. We now have it in round shapes, which makes it a lot more believable. Swiss straw, which is kind of a interesting, slightly shiny synthetic. And foam. Foam is going to be bigger and bigger. I swear to it. There are all kinds of foam. And these are just two out of several, but they're very buoyant, and that buoyancy is essentially permanent unless they just get all chewed to heck. Lots of shiny materials. As you can see, these really add a lot of glitter to a fly. You can never get the effect you can get with these out of natural materials. Marking pens, and they're especially useful with the foams because you can get all kinds, countless colors of marking pens and color your foam any color you want. And finally, we have the chenilles. Now here's the good old original chenille, which is a synthetic kind of wound onto a string. And then everybody started using a finer chenille. And the old original chenille is still very useful, but this is called vernile or ultra chenille, and it's very fine. And for some things, it just looks better. That's materials, but we'll talk a lot more about those as we begin to tie flies. This is a vise, but it's not a fly tying vise. However, it's going to serve my purposes for the moment. This is not really a typical fly tying hook. It's a little on the large side for perhaps anywhere here, but in Oregon where we have some very large insects and very large trout. Let me show you the parts of a hook so that when I'm communicating to you about tying, you'll know what the heck I'm talking about. This is the eye of the hook. This is where the leader goes through and ties. This is the shank of the hook. It is normally straight, but some hooks do have a curved shank. This is the bend of the hook, for I think obvious reasons. This is the barb, which I'll show you how to crimp down later. And this is the point of the hook. Eye, shank, bend, barb, point. And again, eye, shank, bend, barb, point. Now that you know the parts of a hook, we're going to need to talk a little bit about some other details about hooks so that you can understand how to pick out the hooks that you want to use for different flies. Traditionally, we used to use mustad hooks for almost all our trout flies. And that worked great because if you wanted a certain hook used, you'd say a mustad 3906. Okay, so you went and bought a mustad 3906, no problem. The problem is that now we have a variety of different hooks out there from a variety of different companies. And they all use their own model numbers. So somebody else's 2687B might be identical to the mustad 3906. But the model numbers don't tell you that. Well, the thing to do is to forget model numbers for the moment and just understand how you size hooks, how you determine the length of the shank, and how you determine the heaviness of the wire. If you understand those three things, basically you pretty much will understand how to pick out the right hooks that you need. Shank length is determined by X's. There is a standard shank length, a model. If the shank is longer than this standard by 1 increment, then it's 1x long. 2 increments longer than normal for this size of hook, 2x long. That also works if the shank is shorter. If it's 1x short, then it's 1 increment shorter than normal length for that size of hook. 2x shorter is 2 increments shorter, and so on. Simple. You've got standard length, 1x long, 2x long, 3x long, and so forth, and then you've got short, 1x short, 2x short. That shank length, incidentally, does not include the eye. That stays the same, or the bend. That stays the same regardless of the length of the shank. Your next consideration is hook size. That's the overall size of the hook. Now, when the numbers become larger, then the hook becomes smaller. So let's say that we have a size 4 or 6 hook. That's a large hook for a trout fly. A medium-size hook for a trout fly would be a 12 or 14. A small hook for a trout fly would be a 16 or an 18. And if you get into the very smallest hooks, then you have the very largest numbers. 24, 22, 26, those are really tiny trout fly hooks. Now the sizing, there is an inconsistency in the sizing, and that's when you get to the largest hooks. None of the ones that we will use in this videotape are that large, but it's still good for you to understand how it works. When you get down to size 1, then the rules change. A larger hook than a size 1 is a size 1/0. Then you have size 2/0, then 3/0, and then 4/0. Now, the numbers are getting larger as the hook gets larger. I know it's a little confusing, but most of the time you won't have to worry about that. Most of the time, big number, small hook. Finally, we have the wire of the hook, and this is important because if the wire is heavy, that will help the fly to sink. But if you want the fly to float, you probably, in fact, will want to get a wire that is light. There's a standard wire for a certain size of hook, and this is called standard weight or standard wire. If the wire is finer than that, it's called light wire. If it's heavier, it's called heavy wire. And again, we go back to the X system. Now the reason we use the X system for both the shank length and the wire is so that it's as confusing as possible. If you have a wire that is 1 increment lighter than normal, it is 1x light. If it's 2 increments lighter than normal, it's 2x light. If it's heavier than normal, same thing. 1x heavy, 1 increment, 2x heavy, 2 increments, 3x heavy, 3 increments, and so on. The heavy wire is for sinking flies, and again, the light wire is for the floating flies. Here are some of the lesser considerations in hooks. Now this hook is a down eye, and that's because the eye of the hook tips down. A ring eye hook would be straight off the shank, neither tipping up nor down. And an up eye hook would be tipping up. You have 2 choices here. If the pattern calls for a down eye, you can just follow the pattern. If the pattern doesn't say, or if you have a personal preference, then use one of the other types. It really is not that important, and most fly fishers and fly tiers just, after time, they decide which hooks they like. It's not a big consideration, but be aware of it. The other thing is the bend. Now this is probably even less important. There are several kinds of bends on hooks, and they're just slightly different shapes. I'm not going to go into all those. With time, you'll figure out what you like. It's not important. Don't worry about it a lot. All the bends that we use now are pretty much time proven, and they're good. Now there are some inconsistencies that will throw you a bit. The thing to remember about inconsistencies is they're not that important. One manufacturer's size 8 4x long hook may be a little bit bigger, a little bit different than another manufacturer's size 8 4x long hook. It's probably not going to make any difference in the fly. Don't worry about it. If the hook looks about right, it's probably just fine. The other thing is that sometimes they won't follow the rules. They won't call a 4x long hook a 4x long hook. They may call it a bucktail streamer hook or something like that. Well, if they do that, then with time, you will learn these things. You'll learn that a bucktail takes about a 4x long hook, so it's probably a 4x long hook. Not a big deal, but just don't let it throw you. Another thing to look for are abbreviations. If you see TUE on your hook description, it probably means turned up eye. That means an up eye hook. If you see a hook that's described as 4XS, which you rarely will, that's awfully short, but if you see one that says 4XS, it probably means 4X short, or 4XL, 4X long, and so forth. So just watch for abbreviations. They're usually very logical and easy to figure out. If you understand these basic principles about hooks, you'll do fine. These are the parts of a nymph, the first fly that we're going to tie. This is called the tail. This whole thing is called the body, but often we refer to this as the abdomen, this back half or back part of the fly. Sometimes it's less or more than half. These are ribs. This is the thorax. This is the front part of the fly, sort of the chest of the fly. This is a wing case, commonly used on nymphs, not always, but frequently. These are legs, which are tied in a variety of ways. And this is called a thread head. You will see that on most of the flies that we tie. The first fly we're going to tie is Rick's Caddis. This was created by my friend Rick Hafley, and it imitates caddis larvae, which live in the bottoms of streams and eventually swim to the surface and take wing and turn into caddis fly adults. But most of their lives, they spend down in that stream bed looking a lot like Rick's Caddis. Rick is an entomologist, and which is one who studies insects, so you can be sure that if it's a Rick Hafley fly, it's a good, convincing imitation of the real thing, because he spent a lot of time with the real thing. This is called a fly pattern. It may look a little odd to you now, but once you get used to fly patterns, it will become second nature to follow them. Basically, a fly pattern gives you the essential information you need in order to tie a fly. And in most cases, it gives you all the information you need in order to tie a fly. The things that are listed in a fly pattern, from top to bottom, are in the order in which they're called for to tie the fly, usually. But you can't always count on that because not everybody follows that rule. Well, enough fly tying trivia for now. Let's get started tying. The first thing you need is some thread. Now this is yellow thread. You'll be using brown, but I want to show you what I'm doing. Sometimes it's a little tricky to get the thread end loose from the spool. There are some tricks you can use. One is to look for one strand of thread that cuts at a steep angle across the others. When you find that, that is probably the last turn of thread. Go right up to where it hits the spool and then work it loose. It should come up into a notch, a little cut in the spool. Look for that cut and you've also found the thread end. To get that thread end loose, you can take your closed scissor blades and work them down under that strand of thread and then pop it out of the notch in the spool. Now we're going to put that into your bobbin, a thread bobbin. So put it in like this, and then take the end of your thread and push it up into the base of the bobbin tube. And there are a number of ways of getting that thread up through the tube, but the best one I know of, this is if you use your bobbin and nobody else does, is to do this and just suck it right through there with a blast of air. If you have trouble doing that, you can also use, this is my favorite tool for this, is a folded over piece of monofilament or leader material. And you just kind of crease that and then push it down through the tube. When you get it through the end, you put the end of the thread through the loop in the leader, like this, like you're threading a needle, and then pull the loop back through and the thread with it. Now if your thread doesn't want to go through the tube, and this usually won't happen with a new bobbin, but it may happen after a while, that's probably because your thread has a light coating of wax which is built up in the tube, especially down here at the base of the tube. Take some heavy monofilament or anything similar that will do the job, good thick stiff monofilament, push it down the tube, and then just push it through the end of the tube a few times and it will clean out that wax. It'll push that buildup of wax out and then you can thread the bobbin. Once you've got your bobbin threaded, you may find that the bobbin is either too stiff, too tight that is, or that it's too loose. Now you'll learn more about this as you tie. You have to sort of control the bobbin by how tightly you clutch the thread in your fingers. But if the bobbin's too loose, you're going to find that the thread's always slipping off the bobbin and you've got too much thread. If you find that the bobbin is too tight, then you're going to constantly be having to support the hook and sort of pull it out of there, trying not to break the thread. You want it somewhere in between there. If it's too tight or it's too loose, remove the thread and then bend the frame so that these knobs, these ends that fit into the ends of the spool are either out a little to loosen it or in tighter to tighten the thread. Don't bend this part of the frame where the tube is attached to these arms, because if you put pressure on this, it's likely to break the weld joint. Just grab onto here, and 2 pairs of pliers is the best way to do it. 1 pair below this bend, and 1 pair above the bend, and then bend the frame however you see fit. You can also get down here and bend this part of the frame if you need to make adjustments. And just do that on either side until you've got the bobbin just as tight or as loose as you want it. Again, you're going to find out more about that as you continue to tie, because everybody has a little bit different preference in how tight their bobbin should be. You need a hook in order to tie a fly. This is not the hook that you'll be using for this fly, but it's a big hook, so I can show you what I'm doing. We're going to smash the barb on this hook. This is often done now, and most fly fishers do it. Some fly fishing only waters and other special regulation waters require that you smash the barb on your hook. But most fly fishermen do it anyway because they don't want that barb tearing up the fish's mouth. Besides, there's some controversy as to whether a hook actually sinks better without the barb, and I'm leaning that way myself and believing that. Pair of pliers, any kind that have a flat nose are fine. Take your pliers, and I showed you before where the barb was, and you simply grab onto the hook where the barb is and you press down. You tighten the pliers. Don't get exaggerated on this. Don't press very hard. Just get that barb to bend down. There'll still be a hump there. The point is you've got it down out of the way. If you really put the pressure on the pliers, you're likely to fracture that hook. So you've got your hook barb smashed. Your next step is going to be to put that hook into your vise. Now the thing with a fly tying vise, some people try to actually hide the barb of the hook, or the point rather, well, the barb and the point in fact, with the jaws of the vise. I recommend very strongly against doing this. What it does is it greatly limits your access to the hook, and it makes it awkward to work. Other people will mount the hook in the vise so that it's just barely held in there, with the idea that it gives them maximum access. But the problem is that the hook really isn't in there. It's going to pop right out. So somewhere in between those two extremes, about like this, is really the way to mount your hook in your vise. We're going to start the thread now. And I've got this large hook that I showed you how to crimp the barb on still. And I'm going to take this fly line, bright orange fly line, which is not the thread we will be using, and show you how to start the thread. Take 4 turns forward, approximately, and then take a few turns back, 5, 6 turns, and you will see that now the thread is locked over itself. It's not going to slip. I can pull hard on that and it still stays put. Now if you do have problems with this step, there are a few things that you might take a look at. One problem is often that you're using very light thread tension, and that will not lock the thread. If you don't use some thread tension, you're going to have trouble getting that to lock. In fact, this is a good time to practice something that my friend Dave Hughes recommends in a fly tying book that he did, and that is to start your thread and then pull hard enough to actually break your thread. To do that several times so that you get in touch with how easily your thread breaks. It's a good suggestion because you're always trying to get your thread tight, but you don't want to be breaking your thread. Now with your thread started, you can let your bobbin hang. In this case, of course, I don't have a bobbin. Let your bobbin hang and then lift up the stub end of the thread, get your scissors in there, and cut it closely. That's how you start the thread on the hook. Start the thread, start it up maybe 1/8 of an inch behind the eye, and wrap back until you have locked the thread in. Snip the end of the thread, spiral the thread back to about the bend of the hook. Now be careful as you wrap to dodge the sharp point of the hook. If you hit that with the thread, you may weaken the fly or you may break the thread altogether. And when you wrap thread, wrap it away from you over the top of the hook and towards you underneath the hook. Away, over the top, towards you underneath. Let your bobbin hang. The weight of the bobbin will keep everything tight. Take some lead, fine to medium lead, bring it down on top of the hook. If you're a right-hander, you'll have your left hand towards you and your right hand away from you. Hold that end close to the hook and start at just maybe a 1/16 or 1/8 of an inch up from the bend. That is the point where the straight shank meets the curve of the bend. Bring it down, wrap in close consecutive turns up the shank. Now we want to leave plenty of room behind the eye of the hook. Now you have a couple of choices here. Actually, 3 choices. One is you can take your standard fly tying scissors, reach in with the insides of the blades. You don't want to use the tips because you want to preserve the sharpness of the tips. And you can snip the lead. Or you can take old fly tying scissors, ones that you're not worried about, or cheap ones, and reach in and cut with the tips. The other thing you can do with lead is you can just hold the lead and pull on it till it breaks. This will stretch it a bit, and it'll lay down nicely. If the ends of the lead are sticking up at all, this can cause a problem when you tie the rest of the fly. Get in with your fingernails or thumbnails and press down the ends of the lead. Now you notice that the lead stops well short of the eye. That's important. You need that space clear. Get your bobbin in close. It always is easier to work with a close bobbin than one that's far away. This way, you're making small orbits of the hook. It's much more efficient and faster, and you have more control. Build up a bunch of tight thread at the rear of the lead. This is to anchor this end of the lead in position. Now take a steep angle up the lead and wrap over it to the front of the lead. Don't use a low angle. Don't use a slight angle, because what will happen is your thread will keep stalling between these turns of lead. So keep a steep angle on your thread and just zip it right up to the front of the lead. Take a number of tight turns up here in front of the lead, again, to anchor it. Now when you wrap over that lead in the tying of the fly, the lead won't spread out over the hook and get you into trouble. Angle the thread sharply and wrap it back again to the bend. And you can even go down the bend a little bit on this fly, past the end of the straight shank. Now we're going to dub. This is a technique that's been around for a long time. It is used constantly in fly tying. If you do it the wrong way, you'll find it's very frustrating to try to do. If you do it this way, you'll find it very easy. Your thread is probably pre-waxed, but sometimes it really does help a little bit to add some additional wax. This is called dubbing wax. Don't add it too heavily, just a little bit. You can use a soft wax or a hard wax as you choose. And we're going to take this bright green dubbing material. Dubbing, of course, can be natural, such as fur, or it can be synthetic. Now in the Rick's Caddis, at least this version of it, we use this bright green because that imitates the Rhyocophila, which you don't need to remember that if you don't want to. It's just one specific caddis fly that is very bright. You could use natural if you wanted, but this is the brightest stuff I know of in a green. By the way, this fly can be tied with all kinds of colors, anything that's a natural caddis color, tan, black, olive, whatever. But this time we're going to tie it the way it was originally tied. Now, remember, these are right-hander's instructions. In my left hand, I'm going to cradle the bobbin. I'm going to also hold on to the ball of dubbing. I've got several inches of thread here, as you can see, to add the dubbing to. I'm going to draw a little bit of dubbing off the side of the ball. Hardly any. Most people use way too much dubbing, especially at first, and they get in a lot of trouble. Their flies don't have a natural appearance to them, and they don't hold together, and they don't do much anything properly, actually. So just draw off a tiny bit of dubbing, and then hold it up to the thread, and spin it onto the thread. Spin in one direction only. If you spin one way and then back the other, you're spinning the dubbing on and then back off again. You'll never be able to dub well. Keep spinning on dubbing until you've covered quite a bit of the thread. 4 or 5 inches is about the most amount of thread you ever want to dub, because now you've got big orbits that you have to make with your bobbin. If you get them too big, it just seems to take all day to get them on there. Better to add dubbing a couple of times than to do that. Spin that on. And you know, if you want the dubbing to really lay down, put a little dubbing wax on your fingertip or your thumb tip, and you'll find that that really makes this material lay down. Now, there are 2 ways to get the dubbing started on the hook. One is to slide the dubbing down the thread, but let's say that we didn't. Let's say that we've got a little space of thread between the hook and the dubbing. Just wrap forward or back a little bit until the dubbing catches, and just try to time it so that the dubbing catches at the point where you're starting here. Wrap the dubbing forward in consecutive turns. You can build up a little bit to smooth things out here. Now, the thing to remember about dubbing is that this is one of the few materials that, as it's wrapped forward, if you need to wrap back for some reason, you can do it, and it won't look bad. With dubbing, you can get away with that. With most things, you can't. And you're trying to just build a fairly smooth, even body, fairly long and slender, and you go about 2/3, 3/4 of the way up the hook. Now, if there's extra dubbing still left on the thread, just pull it free and pull it off of the thread. Eventually, as you tie the same fly over and over again, you'll get good at judging how much dubbing you need, and then just add the rest of the bit of dubbing right there. Now we're going to dub again. Again, we add wax to the thread, and you have a choice. You can use a synthetic dubbing, such as this brown poly dubbing, or you can use a natural dubbing. We'll be using this a lot. This is called Hare's mask dubbing, and I can show you a little later where it comes from and the various ways to get it. But let's assume for now that you've bought it pre-packaged. You take a little bit. Again, you hold the bobbin in your left hand, cradle it, hold the ball of dubbing, and then tug a little bit off the side. This time, we're going for a rougher appearance, a fuller appearance. So you can dub the thread a little more roughly and a little more heavily. So you're going to make a fairly short, fairly thick thorax on this fly. Start winding this dubbing on, and wind to just behind the eye. Pull a little bit of that off there, a little too much. And bring your dubbing right up to the eye. Now, you'll notice that we have about 1/16 of an inch of clear shank behind the eye. We do that so that we have room for what is called a thread head. If you crowd the eye, you're going to have a tough time making a thread head. Now, to create the thread head, which is standard on most flies, start by stroking back the fur from the eye, leaving that little bit of bare shank exposed. A little bit of moisture on your fingertips can help do this, train that fur out of the way. And then build up a few turns of thread. What you're trying to do is create a tapered head that's very small at the eye and tapers to larger towards the front of the thorax. By the way, that's the front of a fly. That's the back, or the rearward part of the fly. Fronts to the eye, backs to the rear. Take a few turns, build up that tapered thread head, kind of a cone-shaped thread head, and then with the thread at the back part of the head, we're going to make a half hitch. In fact, we're going to make 3 half hitches to secure this fly. This is a knot that is very simple. It just looks difficult. Trust me, it's simple. I'll make it clear. To make the half hitch, bring the bobbin towards you so that the thread is now parallel with the floor and it's coming from the fly straight to you. With your right hand, separate your first and second fingers and get them well separated. If they're too close together, you'll have problems later. Throughout this, keep them well separated. bring them straight down on top of the thread so that their tips meet the thread. Bring the bobbin up. Now rotate your wrists so your fingers go up as you bring the bobbin to the left. The result is that you now have a loop and the thread will cross itself in an X. All you have to do now is to take that side of the loop that's coming from your first finger and hook it over the eye of the hook. Now, let go of the bobbin. Its weight will support the thread. Take your first finger of your left hand, and again, these are right-hander's instructions. Reach it in between your first and second finger on the other hand, and then take those fingers out. With your right hand, pick up something pointed. Your scissors are fine if the blades are smooth on the outside. A hat pin would be fine, a needle, whatever. A bodkin. And slide that inside the loop and take the loop away from the first finger of your left hand. Now pull on the bobbin to draw that closed, to draw that loop closed and finish off the half hitch. When you get this object down to the hook, then just slide it out of the loop, give the loop a tug and make it tight. Add another half hitch, same thing, fingers down, bring it up, fingers tip up, hook the loop over the eye, switch hands with the loop, and then put the object in the loop and close the loop. Now let us assume that you've made 3 half hitches, which is what I recommend. Pull down on your thread, put it under a little bit of tension, reach your scissor tips, put the very tips right up in there, cut your thread. The only thing you have remaining to do now is to add head cement to that thread head. That's so that the thread head doesn't work itself loose and come unravel. You take some epoxy glue. This is what I use. You can also buy head cement in little bottles. And all you have to do is open the bottle, dip something in there, and put some head cement on the fly. But I like the epoxy. I like it because, for one thing, the epoxy glue has no fumes, so I don't have to be breathing some kind of chemical fumes. And the other thing is that it holds like crazy. It's just tougher than nails. Put a little bit of that onto a piece of paper, or anything you want, old magazine or TV guide or something like that, and then an equal amount of the other component. There's an A component and a B component. Now, take a pointed toothpick. This is the round kind with a sharp point. And you mix those together. Mix them thoroughly. Make sure you get all the epoxy up here and mixed into the batch. Next, wipe off most of that epoxy. Take the very pointed tip of that toothpick, dip it in the epoxy. Now bring it up here and add that to the thread head, and then work it around the thread head. And that is how you cement the head. Now this can be tricky when you're just reaching over like this. If you had a steady rest, it would help, right? Okay, use your vise as a steady rest. It's solid, it's firm, and it's holding the fly. So it works great. Now one way you can do it is just to reach up a finger and touch the vise. You'd be surprised how much that helps. The other thing you can do is take your other hand and use it as a steady rest by steadying it against your vise. And you can use a finger, thumb, part of the hand, whatever it takes to steady your other hand. And you'd be surprised how much this helps when you're doing operations like this that have to be precise. Work the epoxy around the thread head, be thorough, get underneath. And then set this fly aside for the epoxy to cure. If it's a fast curing epoxy, then even in an hour or so you can take the fly fishing. If it's a slow curing epoxy, it could take several hours, but you have the advantage of that much time in which to work with the epoxy and put epoxy on other thread heads. Now the best way to do this, if you're trying to do a bunch of flies, is to tie a bunch of flies and then put the head cement on all the flies at once. It's just a lot more efficient and a lot faster. Take this out of your vise, set it somewhere, or better yet, get a block of wood or a block of styrofoam, stick it into the block of wood or styrofoam, and set that aside. Then you know that that head is up and it's not touching anything, it's not going to get glued to anything. Check on your fly before you put it in the block, and even a little later is not a bad idea, and make sure that the epoxy or whatever head cement you used didn't go in and fill the eye of the hook. Now, if you're using a conventional head cement and it fills the eye, it's not that big a deal. Later, with another hook point or a needle, you can clear it out. But if you're using the epoxy, this stuff, again, is really tough, and you would have a difficult time getting it out of the eye. So remove it from the eye now, and be extra careful if it's epoxy. You know, it's a good idea to check your fly a little while later, 10 or 15 minutes later, and make sure that that epoxy or even the head cement has not filled the eye. Now, if it does fill the eye at any time when the cement is still not fully cured, here's a great way to clear that eye. This is just a feather. This happens to be what's called a hackle, but it doesn't matter. Any feather with a stem and some fibers is fine. And I just stripped a little bit of the stem clear, and I'm going to put that through the eye and then pull it through. And as I pull it through, it cleans out all that cement in the eye. That's a good way to go. This is the Elk Hair Caddis. This is going to be the toughest fly that you will tie out of this book. The reason it's the toughest fly is because it's the first fly. We've had to cover a lot of ground with this fly, a lot of basics. From now on, we're going to move a little more slowly, and we'll just keep referring back to the things that you've learned at this point. And a couple of new techniques per fly. We're going to keep rolling. It's going to get easier, if anything. So just stick with it. When you feel comfortable tying this fly, or even if you don't, go on to the next fly. The next fly we're going to tie is called the white and grizzly woolly bugger. The woolly bugger is a close cousin of the old standby, the woolly worm, which was terribly popular for a lot of years, and now it seems the woolly bugger is as popular as the woolly worm was. You're going to learn here how to perform the pinch and a little bit about hackle. The woolly bugger is tied in all sizes and different color combinations. It's weighted or unweighted. It's fished deep or shallow in streams and lakes, usually with a twitching or pulsing action, and it can be used for a great variety of fish, most commonly trout, but sometimes char, Atlantic salmon, steelhead, bass, and even saltwater species. The woolly worm was created by Russell Blessing. The first thing you need to do in tying the woolly bugger is to select a hackle. Now, you can use a standard dry fly hackle and find one of the webbier, larger hackles, but better yet, I think, is to use a large saddle hackle. Now, to select the proper hackle, you can either do it by using the hook, or you can do it by using a hackle gauge. If you use a hackle gauge, as you can see that I have two types here. One sits on the stem of the vise, and one goes into the vise's jaws. I'll use the one that goes into the vise's jaws this time. When you use a hackle gauge, notice that it's the longest fibers which indicate on the gauge what size hackle you have. Get one that matches the size of your hook. In this case, it's a size 6 hook. Prepare that hackle by stripping the fuzz from the stem. And you'll notice that the hackle has plenty of good hard fibers, about the same length down here, and then the fibers tend to be quite a bit longer down here at the base. Strip the ones off the base, off of both sides, until you have bare stem. Now, set that prepared hackle aside. Put the hook in your vise. Now, as I was saying about hooks, there is quite a bit of variation from manufacturer to manufacturer. This hook is supposed to be 4x long. It looks to me like it's longer than that. But regardless, it still makes a very good woolly bugger. So, as I say, it's not all that important. Start the thread as before, just behind the eye, maybe an 1/8 inch or so. Spiral it quickly back to the bend. Now we're going to take a marabou plume, a white marabou plume, and to control that plume, we're going to use this cup of water, just dip my fingers in there, and then stroke some of the water into the plume. Marabou is kind of fluffy, soft stuff, and it moves around and tends to be hard to control unless you wet it down. Now measure that plume against the hook. Hold it down so the tip of the plume comes to where the bend begins, and then note the point where the eye is. That's 1 shank length. Grasp the marabou plume at that point. Move it back to the bend, and now we're going to use a technique that I call the pinch. This is a great way to tie in soft materials. Bring your thread up on the near side. Now tuck it back between your thumb and the material, and now it's held there. Bring it down the far side and tuck it back. You can even roll your finger back a little between your finger and the material. Now you've got a loop of thread enclosing the material. Open the joints, your second joint on your first finger and your first joint on your thumb, spread them apart a bit, and that will roll your thumb tip and fingertip forward over the loop of thread. Now you've got the loop and the material enclosed in the center of your finger and thumb. You've got control of that material, and as you pull down on the loop, the material will stay right atop the hook. Now as soon as you've got that on there, add a few tight turns of thread right in the same place, and you've got the tail of the woolly bugger tied in. Lift that marabou out of the way and spiral the thread quickly to just up behind the eye, maybe 1/8 of an inch or 3/16, something like that. Now you can do another pinch if you want, or you can do what I just did, which is to drape the bobbin over the other side. Again, you could just use the pinch again. Back between the thumb and the material, down the far side between the finger and the material, open the joints, roll them forward, pull it tight. Either way is fine. You can snip this off now or later, but I'll do it now so it's a little clearer so you can see what's going on. And spiral the thread again down to the bend. A word of caution. Remember that when you're working with materials at the bend, you don't want to go any further back towards the bend than the first wraps. In other words, these thread wraps at the bend, the furthest ones back, I don't want to wrap any further than that again. If I do, I'll start knocking the tail out of position and causing all kinds of problems. So just go back to the same spot, or maybe slightly ahead of it. Now, take your stripped hackle and use the pinch to tie it in right at the bend. Lift it, spiral the thread forward again. Use the pinch if you like, tie in the front of the hackle stem. And now cut that. Now we're going to take this large chenille. We're not going to take that piece. We're going to take this large chenille, cut off a few inches, and then use the pinch to tie that in. We're about 1/8 to 3/16 behind the eye. Hold the chenille up slightly above the shank under light tension and spiral the thread down it to the bend. Now if your chenille slipped out when you were holding it just now, the way to avoid that is either to get that turn that it's tied in with quite tight, or to add several tight turns before you take your next step. Spiral it right back to the bend, but no further than the previous wraps, no further back, and then spiral your thread forward again to just a little bit behind the eye, maybe 1/8 of an inch. Now, take the chenille, pass it from hand to hand as you wind it in consecutive turns up the shank. Just keep wrapping that chenille. Oops. Until you get right up to the eye. Now hold the chenille slightly tipped off the eye. Bring your bobbin over, this is for right-handers, with your left hand, and drape it over the other side. This way you kept your chenille tight and you got your first turn of thread. Pull out a little bit tight. Now you can let go. Add a few more turns and snip that chenille closely. With the body completed, it's time to wrap the hackle. Now you can do this by handing the hackle from hand to hand if it's a long enough hackle, and not even bothering with hackle pliers. However, especially since it's a little early in the game, why don't you use your hackle pliers and get used to them? Attach the hackle pliers to the tip of the hackle. Use plenty of the hackle. This tip section has got short fibers anyway, and if you get too close to the tip, you'll find you're always breaking your hackle pliers off. Put the hackle pliers in line with the stem of the hackle, and as you wrap, keep the hackle pliers in line. Now you can hold them like this, as I am, between your first finger and your thumb, or you can put your finger through the loop, like this. Make at least 4 turns of hackle, and up to 7 or 8. There's no hard rule on this fly at all. It's kind of one of those flies that everybody ties his or her own way. And remember that with hackles, this is not as tough as thread or some of the materials. Don't wrap it too tightly, just snug. That's something you need to adjust to. You'll break a few hackles in finding out, but just make sure that it's snug. And if you keep pretty much the same angle as you wrap, you will find that the hackle, turns of hackle, the palmered hackle, that these turns are pretty evenly spaced. Just keep that same angle. And when you get to the eye, you have a choice. You can just stop here and tie off the hackle, or some people like to take a couple of extra turns right in front of the eye, right behind the eye. Tip your hackle pliers off the eye a little bit with your right hand. This is for right-handers. And with your left hand, bring the bobbin up and drape it over the far side. When you've got a couple of turns on there, you can open your hackle pliers, release the tip, and then make another turn or two, and then reach in closely and snip off the tip. If there are any problems here, any materials, hackle fibers, for example, that are sticking forward that you don't want, just snip them out. Snip them right at their base. And now we're going to use a technique called the triangle to pull these fibers back out of the way to create a thread head. Put your first finger to your thumb and your second finger against the tips of your thumb and your first finger. Now you'll see that in the center of all that, there's a little space. The space is sort of triangular shaped. That's why I call this the triangle. Draw the triangle over the eye of the hook. As you do, lighten the tension between your thumb and your second finger just enough to let the thread slip through, but not enough to allow anything else to slip through. Now the further you go back with the triangle, the clearer your access is to create the thread head. However, if you go back too far, you find that things start popping loose. So you just have to adjust. You want to be back more or less as far as you can be, but this isn't a big deal. You just need to be far enough back to get good access. Now we're going to build a thread head. This is created simply by adding turns of thread, more turns at the rear of the head than the front, so that it has a tapered shape, going from small at the front to large at the rear, sort of a cone shape. And that's a thread head. All that remains now is to add some half hitches to secure that head. This is the gold-ribbed hare's ear. It's most likely the most popular nymph in America right now. And the reasons for that are that it's easy to tie and that it catches a lot of fish. It can be tied weighted or unweighted, and it's generally fished in streams dead drift, that is, without any artificial motion, either up near the surface or right down along the bottom. And when it's fished in lakes, it's usually made to swim along, again, either deep or shallow. I began by smashing the barb, as we did before, and then I added a layer of thread from just behind the eye, maybe 1/8 of an inch, to just past the center of the shank. Now on top of that layer of thread, I'm going to spin on some lead. Sometimes lead is crumbly. If you run into that, then keep sliding your grip down the lead as you wrap it. Then you won't fatigue it at one particular point. The lead on this fly, if you're going to use lead, should run from somewhere around the center of the shank to about 1/8 of an inch behind the eye. Just remember that you need plenty of room behind the eye. You don't want to crowd it. Now we'll tie it in the usual manner. Thread dam, spiral the thread quickly forward. Thread dam, spiral it back. Now spiral it all the way to the bend. And at the bend, we're going to tie in the tails. You can use almost anything for the tails of a hare's ear. I'm going to use hare's mask. This is the most common tailing material and the one usually called for. Snip out just a little bit of it right off the mask. And then pull some of the fuzz out of the base of these fibers so that you leave the long hairs called guard hairs. A little batch of these, not too many. Measure them against the hook so they're about half the length of the hook or so. A little longer or shorter is fine. And use the pinch to tie these in at the bend. Now, you have two choices. You can either sort of follow the butts of the fibers up and keep them in place as you add turns of thread over them, kind of light turn of thread and then pull it tight. Or you can just snip them off back there after you add a few tight securing thread turns. Right behind the lead, we're going to tie in the gold tinsel. Now, this is oval gold tinsel. You can use flat if you choose. This is just stiff enough material to use a technique that I call the light turn. With materials that are stiff, or at least somewhat stiff, you simply hold the material there, use just enough thread tension to control the thread, no more, no less, and take a light tension turn over the material. When the turn is taken, pull the thread tight. That's all you do. Just remember, not too much tension or the material will slide around in front of the thread, and not too little or you don't have any control over the thread. Lift this up, spiral the thread down it to the bend. You can keep that out of your way in the material holder if you like. Now, you have some choices. You need hare's mask material for this next step. You can buy the mask like this and then trim some of it away. And if you trim some of it away, trim it from between the eyes and then from the ears. Don't get these bushy cheek areas or up here on top of the head. Grotesque, isn't it? Take some of this and you can hand blend it like this, just pulling it apart, sticking it back together, and pretty soon it will be blended fairly well. Or you can use the blender. Or you can buy bags of this material pre-blended. The only thing is if you buy the pre-blended material, you'll have to use something else. For example, pheasant tail fibers or some other kind of feather fibers that are soft to create the tails because you won't have the mask to draw the fibers off of. So if you want to buy it pre-blended, do it. But just remember that we'll have to use something as an alternate for the tails, which is no big deal. Now we're going to dub, as usual, and we're going to try to create a tapered abdomen that runs from the tail, that's right at the bend, of course, of the hook, up to just past halfway up the shank. And we just keep dubbing that material on. Now you have a couple choices here. You can dub the material on a little bit at the beginning and more heavily as you get up. That will create the tapered abdomen. Or you can dub it on equally and then just build it more as you go up. Take more turns each time so that you have that taper. Either way is fine. Now start wrapping that. Again, right back to those furthest to the rear thread turns, but no further, or you'll knock your tail out around. Build up that tapered abdomen so it starts at small and then builds up as it reaches just past the center of the shank. If you have extra dubbing, draw it off of the thread now. Now, let your bobbin hang. With the abdomen dubbed, take up the oval gold tinsel and wrap it in spaced ribs up the tapered abdomen. Now you can increase the space between the ribs as you go, or you can keep it the same. I don't care. And I know the fish don't care. Anywhere from 4 to 6 ribs is about right. And go right up to the front of the abdomen, which is again a little past halfway up the shank. Now hold the material off the eye, and with your left hand, this is for right-handers, work that bobbin over in a few turns to secure the material, and then trim it off with the insides of your scissor blades, well down in there, so that you don't damage the points. The next thing we need to do is to create the wing case for this nymph. Normally this is done with mottled turkey quill, but as a substitute you could use duck quills or even pheasant tail fibers. When you're tying flies, you have to be flexible. This is called substitution when you use other materials. There's nothing wrong with it. In fact, it's standard procedure. Cut a section from the turkey quill about like this and measure it against the hook. This part of the hook between the point and the shank is called the gape. We want this section to be a little bit smaller than the gape. This is a matter of personal preference, but a little bit smaller than the gape, so you can always strip some off the side and peel it off the section if you have too much. Now we're going to roll the cut base of this around the top of the lead. Of course, if you didn't weight this hook, you won't have lead there, but that's all right. You can add a little extra dubbing or just put it around the shank. Now take a light turn over that. Roll your thumb and finger forward to support it, sort of a variation of the pinch, and then pull tight. And now you've preserved the flatness of that material. You don't have it bunched together. You actually have it rolled flatly around the top half of the lead and the shank of the hook. Secure that with plenty of tight thread turns. If you need to, go in and trim the end of the section, which you may not have to do, depending on how you tied it in. And now we're going to take some more of the hare's mask. This time we want to dub more heavily. If you recall, this is similar to what we did on the Rick's caddis. What we're trying to do here is to create the effect of legs by this roughness. Remember that there are guard hairs in here, the same kind of hairs we used for the tail of this fly, and we're going to use those to create the effect of legs. So our next step is going to be to dub the thread heavily and build up a nice thick thorax. Make sure you cover all the lead whenever you have a weighted fly. The lead should not be showing. In fact, it's not a bad idea to go back and take a look at both sides of the fly before you decide you're done dubbing, so you can be sure that there isn't any lead showing, because actually it's pretty common knowledge that real mayfly nymphs do not have any visible lead. Take this fiber, this section, pull it flatly over the eye of the hook, hold it there under modest tension. You don't have to pull it real tight or it may pull back out later. And with your left hand, for right-handers, drape the bobbin over the hook again. Okay, now you can add a few tight turns. Make sure you've got that well secured before you cut this, because you'll have to go backwards through a few steps and untie the fly before you can fix it if this slips loose. Now use a little moisture. That will help you control those fibers. And draw all this stuff, the fibers and everything, back away from the eye to create a thread head. Now if you pull down on your bobbin a little bit, that will also help you secure those wing case fibers as you do this. Build up your thread head. Give it 3 half hitches as before. Add head cement. The final thing you'll do is to reach in with your scissor tips or something sharp, a bodkin, a needle, whatever, and tease some of these fibers out to the sides of the thorax region so that you get the effect of legs. And that is how you tie a very popular and killing fly, the gold-ribbed hare's ear. The components of a dry fly do not differ all that much from those of a nymph, but let's take a look at them because there are some differences. These are the tails, no surprises there. This is the body, which is sometimes called the abdomen. Depends on whether there's a thorax or not. This is the hackle collar. This is the traditional hackle collar, which is often found on catskill dry flies, other traditional dry flies. And these are the wings. In this case, these are hackle tip wings. Notice that they are upright, as they often are in dry flies, although sometimes they are down wings, which come back over the body. We'll see more about that a little later. And of course, the thread head is right there. The Adams is the first dry fly that we will tie. Dry fly, of course, means that it's supposed to float, not sink. And the Adams was created by a fellow named Len Halliday. It's been very popular for a lot of years, and I think part of the reason it's so popular is because it's sort of nondescript. It looks a little bit like just about everything. And so it's a very versatile fly. If you have a question about what fly to tie on, a lot of guys will say, make it the Adams. So it's a good place to start. It's a traditional dry fly in its makeup. It has a tail, a body, a hackle collar, and upright wings. We start our thread just back from the eye of the hook, a 1/16 of an inch, or a little more. Wrap back to just short of mid-shank. Cut the thread, and now wrap forward over that first layer of thread to just short of the center of that first layer of thread. Now the wings are the first thing that we will tie in. Hen saddle is my favorite. This is great stuff for wings on hackle tip winged dry flies. And there are other things you can use. You can use dry fly hackle tips and so forth, but I really prefer the saddle. Pick out 2 of these of appropriate size so that they match up. And appropriate size just means that they're not huge and not small. In this case, it's a size 12 hook, so just that medium size. Take up one of the Grizzly hen saddle hackles, and then the other. They should be fairly well matched. Notice they have a curve to them. Set them so that the curves are going away from one another. For right-handers, get both wings, both hackle tips, in your left hand. Notice they're curving away. And then even them so they come out to the same point. In other words, so they're extending from your grip the same distance. Then they're ready to tie in as wings. Measure those so that they reach from the tips right at the eye of the hook to your tie-in point, which will be right at mid-bend. That is, halfway between where the bend starts and the bend ends. Right in between there. You can see if I sight along the edge of my thumb, I'm looking at that point. That's a good way to measure points, by the way, is to use the way you hold the material as part of a way to note the measured point. But with this wing, one advantage is that it's barred, so it has the white and black stripes. You can use those as a gauge also. Hold that down right at so that that measured point is right where the thread is, right where the thread has stopped. Use the pinch and tie in your wings. Now, before you do anything else, keep that tension on the thread and take several tight turns, just as you always do when you tie in a material. Wrap back a little ways and trim off the butts. Trim them at an angle. Don't trim them straight across bluntly. This is a rule that you should keep in mind almost always when you're tying flies. Cut things at an angle. Then you will have a taper that's easy to wrap thread up and down. You won't have a blunt edge. If your foundation of your fly has a blunt edge or a dip or some problem like that, then the fly that you tie over it will still have that same problem, that same inconsistency. So if you cut things at an angle, you eliminate a lot of that. Let's wrap back to the bend now. You can tie tails in 2 different ways. You can tie them in up the shank and then wrap back over the materials, or you can tie them in right at the bend. I'm going to tie them in right at the bend this time, just to show you how it's done. This is the easiest way to measure also. Now the best hackles from a dry fly neck, of course you don't need to use a hackle neck for a dry fly. You can use saddle hackles, good quality saddle hackles. Either way is fine. But if you're using the neck and you want to tie in the tail materials, use these hackles that are on the sides of the neck. This is called spade hackles. They're kind of short, but they have long fibers. They're not good for much else, but they're very good for tailing. And you can leave that on the neck if you want, or you can pop it free. If you leave it on the neck, you can find the same feather and use it again for tails. Hold that feather in such a way that you can draw a few fibers off. Now I like to hold part of the feather between my thumb and first finger and the other part between the other two fingers. Draw the fibers to a right angle to the stem, which squares the points, and then strip them off. Now just use a few of these and use the pinch to tie them in. Measure them against the hook. They want to be the full length of the hook. Now, take that measured full hook length and tie it in right at the bend using the pinch. Now you've got some Grizzly hackle fibers. You could have started with the brown. It doesn't matter. We will now take some brown hackle fibers from a brown spade hackle. Strip those off. Just need a few of them. And tie those in atop the Grizzly. Same length. You don't need to measure against the hook this time. You can just measure against the previous fibers. Tie that in. And now one more of the Grizzly. And that sort of gives you a mix of Grizzly and brown in the tail. Let's put in a few Grizzly fibers here. Now when you tie in materials, you have a choice. You can have the fibers gathered like this. Notice that they're fairly bunched together. That's because I used turns of thread over them that were only moderately tight. They're tied in with tight turns, but the turns that hold them in place back here on the bend are only moderately tight. Watch what happens as I tighten the thread. See how those fibers start to spread out? Now if I do that with hair, you'll be amazed how they'll spread out. You have a choice. I think for a fishing fly, you're probably better to have them spread out a bit. For a display fly, a fly tied just for viewing and mounting, I prefer to have a gathered tail. Let me show you how to use that dubbing whirl that I talked about earlier. And I'm going to take some of this muskrat, trim it off the hide. Now you can put it in a blender if you like, or you can hand blend it. If you want a really smooth body, then pull out these guard hairs. These are those long hairs, long stiff hairs that stick up above the fur. And then you have just the soft underfur. Or if you're not that worried about it, just cut it off and use it. Add a little bit of dubbing wax to your thread. And now I've wrapped the thread forward a little bit from where the tails are. And I am going to hook, well, the first thing I'm going to do is dub the thread. You could, of course, use the dubbing whirl, or you could use one of the dubbing tools. The dubbing whirl's kind of slick, though, and I'll show you how that works. I always get a kick out of using this thing. Now, hook that over your whatever dubbing tool you're using, the dubbing whirl, or again, it could be one of the other dubbing tools, and make a loop. Now wrap your thread back over that loop. Just spiral it back to the bend, or even just short of the bend if you want. And then wrap your thread forward to just past the middle of the shank. Drape the dubbing loop over your finger, and then give it a spin. Should do it. When you let your finger off, you've got a very tightly wound bunch of dubbing there. Now you could have dubbed the body in the conventional manner, and that would have been just fine. But this is a good opportunity to take a look at how this tool is used. Now you wrap that forward. There are a lot of ways of doing this. You can keep the dubbing tool in the loop, or if you think that there's no problem about losing the spin of the thread, you can just take it out of the dubbing whirl. Or you could even put your hackle pliers on the end of this to keep it from spinning around and losing its all the spin that you put into it. And that's another way of creating a body. This creates a very tough dubbed body when you use the dubbing whirl. So it does have that advantage. Now again, wrap that right up to just past mid-shank, and then tie off the thread from the dubbing loop using your thread. Okay, it's time to set the wings. Bring the thread up to just behind the wings. Pull the wings, grab them by their center, and pull them back. Now you notice that a lot of little fibers are sticking forward. Reach in with your scissors and snip those out. And snip closely so you get them all. Get them in close. Now take your thumbnail. If you're right-handed, it'll be your right thumbnail. And crease those wings upright. Now you see they're staying up. So pull them back. Take a few tight turns of thread right up against their base to hold them upright so that they don't later start to lay down again. And then tug them into position and wrap your thread back to the front of the body. Now this time I'm going to use my base-mounted hackle gauge, and I'm going to gauge a size 12 brown, since it's a size 12 hook, and a size 12 Grizzly. And I'll show you a few tricks about making the hackle collar, conventional hackle collar, that I think will improve the quality of your hackle collars. Especially if you've never tied flies before. When you strip a hackle, one thing that will help you figure out where to strip the hackle is your hackle gauge. If you'll notice, the fibers start out very large on this one, about a size 8, and then they start dropping down suddenly until we're in the size 12 zone. Now they're going to stay in that zone, and that's called the sweet spot on a hackle, until almost the tip. That tells you where to strip the fibers. You see you have this section where the fibers are all the same length, and then suddenly they bell out, they get larger. That is usually, even in very good hackles, that is usually about the middle of the feather. And from that point down, you strip off the fibers. A lot of people go down as low as they can. They get down just to this very fuzz, and the problem is they have big long hackles and it's much smaller ones ahead of it. And in a dry fly, that is not such a good thing to have. So find that point, prepare the hackles by stripping the fibers from their base, and then tie them in. You can tie them in together using a light turn, and leave a little bit of extra stem sticking out there. That will help the hackles to wind well. Try to tie in the hackles so they're on their sides like this. Because you want them to wrap on their sides, if you start them out tied in on their sides, you'll find it's that much easier to get them wrapping that way. Wrap the thread forward over plenty of the stem. You don't want those to pop out. And then trim those stems off. Continue wrapping the thread forward. Try not to knock the wings out of position. Take a big spiral to avoid the wings until you get to about a 1/16 of an inch behind the eye. Now, one thing with fly tying materials is that a lot of fly tyers are just too darn gentle with materials. This fly is going to be cast at up to 90 miles an hour. If you fish like I do, it'll be bounced off trees and limbs and yanked out of there. Bounced off rocks if you really fish like I do. And these materials have to be able to take that and the chewing of trout. So they're tough enough, believe me. You can be a little bit aggressive with materials. You want to be in control. You don't want the material to control you. So pull these wings forward. If you stroke them forward a little bit, they'll stay forward and out of your way. Take up one of the hackles, grab its tip in your hackle pliers. Now, get the tip so that it's in line like this with the jaws. This will keep you from bending the stem of the hackle and weakening it. Also, when you wrap, if I don't do that, then the second hackle is going to send the first hackle all over the place, which I don't want. Pull those wings back out of the way, and now you can make those turns a little bit closer because your stem has gotten quite a bit thinner up here at this part of the hackle. And wrap right up to where the thread is hanging. Hold the hackle off the eye and take 2 turns of thread. That should hold that hackle in place. Get the wings forward and out of the way again, And now take up your second hackle. Now I'm going to try to work this so that it drops into that slot. Just work it around a little bit, and since there's a slot for it, I don't have to be all that exact as I wrap this. It's going to drop into that slot because the hackle stem is basically rounded, and it's not going to sit on top of the other hackle. If there's a slot, it's going to roll into it. And just keep wrapping it forward at about the same angle you wrap the first one, and it will drop into that slot, and you'll have a very neat hackle neck, hackle collar, not neck. Take 2 turns of thread. Now all that remains is to trim those tips. Trim carefully. And again, trim out any hackles that look like they're going to be in your way. Make the triangle as before. Build your thread head. Complete that thread head in the usual manner. And then tug your wings up into position. And if you want to separate them a bit, give them a little tug now to separate them. And that finishes the Adams, a very useful and versatile dry fly. Let's take a look at the steps we would have taken in order to tie a hairwing, hairtail dry fly. Otherwise, it would be tied just exactly the same as the Adams, but I'll show you a little bit different in the hairtail and hairwing. First, usually on hair flies, dry flies, you want more hackle. You'll tie in 3 hackles. The other thing you'll do is when you wrap that first thread layer, you'll go probably back to the center of the shank, or maybe even a little further if you want that much hackle, because that first wrap is a guide as to how much of the shank will be covered with hackle. Wrap forward again to just short of the center of that first wrap, and now take your material, whether it's deer hair or bucktail or elk hair, snip some off of the hide, snip it close to the hide, and comb it out because there's going to be a fine fuzz in that. Just a conventional hair comb works fine. We're going to use the hair stacker, and you will see that there's no substitute for this. At least that's what I've seen. And just tap that. You can tap it against your wrist. If you want to drive your family crazy, you can do this. But I think this is better. Another way you can do it is to put some kind of material down, maybe a hide or something, and just tap on that. It doesn't take very many taps. I like the stackers that are wide because I can stack a little hair or a lot. And it's the ability of the hair to spread out that makes it stack properly. A slim stacker will not allow that very well. Tip this up a little bit, as I just did. Take off the cap. Now take the hair out, and you will notice that the tips are all evened. Try to handle the hair as little as possible once it's stacked. Try not to hand it from hand to hand any more than you have to. Measure it against the shank, tie it in same length as the Adams, using the pinch. And you notice that's all over the place, but don't worry, it'll get better. And then wrap back over the hair a little bit, really secure it in there. Trim the hair at an angle. Now, the best way to do this is just to keep hanging on to those hair butts as you go, like I did. If you let go of them, though, you can still just gather them up and cut them. Again, at an angle. Pull your hair forward out of your way, wrap over those butts and bind them, at least partially. And then wrap back to the bend, or just short of the bend if you'd rather. Cut, comb, and stack a smaller batch, about half as many hairs as the first batch. Pull out the short fibers and so forth. And when you comb the hair, you want to comb it from the tips out. Just hold it by its tips and comb. I like to lean the stacker just before I open it to the side. That gathers the hair together a bit. Handle stacked hair deliberately. Make your motions certain and don't hesitate. And again, handle the hair as little as possible. All this works to help maintain the stacked hair. Now measure that so it's a full hook's length. Tie it in using the pinch so that your measured point, even if your thread isn't at the bend, is at the bend. Make sure the measured point is at the bend. tying the hair. You wrap forward over the hair a little bit until you get up to where, just behind where the wings are tied in. Or you could have tied the hair in behind the wings. Just make sure the tails are the right length. Lift the butts up and cut them at an angle so that they overlap the angle of the butts of the wings. Now you've got the wing butts cut at an angle and the tail butts cut at an angle, and those angles are overlapping. This will give you a consistent underbody for your fly. Now, let me show you what I was talking about again about how tight your thread is. This is flaring hair versus grouping hair. Here are moderately tight turns. Look how tightly the tails are gathered. They're fairly close together, fairly grouped. If I pull that thread tight, they spread out. In fact, they spread out like crazy if I really pull it tight. So if your hair is fairly spongy, you want to use at least some gathering turns, just so it doesn't go crazy on you. Now let us say that we've dubbed the body, which we have not, but let us say it. And then pull all these hairs back for the wing. Push your thumbnail up there to set them up, and then take a few turns in front. So far it's like the Adams, but now here's the difference. Sight down the front of the shank. That way you can easily see where the center of the fibers are. You can divide it into two equal groups. Push your scissors down the center of the wing fibers and tug one half to one side and the other half to the other side. That separates the hairs into two separate wings. Now bring your thread, now I'm bringing it from the front to the back and then forward. It doesn't really matter how you do it. The point is, you want to make some turns that go around the shank and between these two groups of hair. The idea is to separate those groups. With that done, you want to gather the hair now into the wings. That depends, of course, on how much your hair flares. But this hair flares quite a bit, so I'm going to take a few moderate tension turns up that wing, and that's going to gather it so that it is actually grouped into a wing. Now I'm going to bring the thread around behind the wing and down my side, the near side of the hook. I'm going to lift that wing into position as I pull back on the thread, pull it down and back towards the rear of the hook, and that will set the wing upright. Now you'll notice that we've reversed thread direction. It's now going over the hook towards me and away from the hook underneath. That's why we did the far wing first. Now watch when we do the near wing. A few moderately tight thread turns, but not too tight to gather the wing together. And then we bring that over behind the wing, tipping back, and over the far side of the hook. Now we lift that into position and pull back on that thread. Now we've got that wing set. Notice that we've also brought the thread back into its original direction, going away from us over the shank and towards us under. And we've got our hair wing and our hair tail completed. If we had dubbed the body, now we would add in 2 or maybe 3 hackles, and we would have a hair wing fly. The Elk Hair Caddis is one of those few dry flies, or flies in general, that could be called ingenious. It was created by Al Trout. Al found a simple way to wrap the hackle in reverse, which makes it a good fly for skating and skipping, which natural caddis do, and to reinforce that hackle with gold wire. It's a really clever fly, fairly simple to tie, unconventional, a good imitation of the caddis fly adult. We're using 3/0 thread this time, a heavier thread, because we want to really secure that elk hair wing. And by the way, 3/0 thread would also be a good choice for the hair tail and hair wings, upright wings that we did right after the Adams. Don't be afraid to use these heavier threads. If you have something that you need a heavy thread for, use it. It'll make your fly that much stronger. And you can also bear down on that heavy thread more because the thread is stronger and you can make your thread turns tighter. Now I just tied in some gold wire. I'm wrapping back over the wire to the bend. Put the wire in the material holder. Now we're going to dub quite a full body, right up to about 1/8 of an inch behind the eye. I've already prepared a hackle. You can go a half size larger or even a size larger for this fly than you normally would. Use a light turn, tie the hackle in on its side with the bulk of the hackle facing back and the hackle's stem facing forward. Lift the stem and trim it closely. Hackle pliers, now you're going to wrap that hackle back over the body in several ribs. The more ribs you make, the higher your fly will float. I'll take 1 or 2 turns right behind where the thread is hanging, right in front of the body, and then I will begin wrapping the hackle back. I'd use at least 5 turns of hackle on a Elk Hair Caddis. That is 5 ribbed turns that are traveling after the first 1 or 2. And when you get back to the bend, here's the way I like to do this. I like to hold the hackle tip and the hackle pliers up off the bend like this. Works very well for me. Some people simply drape the hackle pliers down the far side, but I find this is the easiest for me. You can do it either way. Take out the gold wire, take a turn of the gold wire over the hackle's tip. Now, this is the part that gets a little tricky, but it really is, in my opinion, the best way to do it. Squeeze the hackle pliers and release the hackle tip. Now maintain constant tension on that wire. Take a couple of turns, and then spiral the wire up through the hackle. The wire is now holding the hackle's tip, and it's also reinforcing the hackle, making it stronger yet. Some people substitute thread for the wire, but I still use the wire. When you get to the front of the hackle, hold the wire off the front of the fly, work a couple of turns of thread over it, and now grab that fly, pull the wire back and wrap back over it a little bit. Now the reason I'm doing that is just to make sure that wire is really secured, because it is slippery. Reach in with the insides of your scissors and trim the wire. Now you notice that when I did that, when I was handling the wire, I just grabbed onto the fly. Don't be afraid to grab onto the hook or even the fly as you tie. Especially these lighter wire dry fly hooks and long shank hooks tend to move around. They tend to be flexible, and they're hard to handle sometimes when you really need to put some pressure on them. So just grab the hook and support it as you see fit. Now go in and trim out that hackle tip. This pattern calls for bleached elk hair, which is rather whitish. Here's an alternative, is to get natural light elk hair. You can see that the tips are almost a cream color. And since I have this here and I've got some in my stacker, I've already combed this. I'll just finish stacking it. And I will use the natural light elk hair, which is, to me, just as good as the bleached elk hair. Now you want this wing, it's going to be a down wing, by the way. It's going to lay down rather than stick up like the Adams wing did. You want it to extend about 1/8 of an inch or so on a size 12 hook past the far edge of the bend. Now the conventional way to tie this in, I'll show you that first, is to hold it right there, make the pinch, take a whole lot of thread turns, lift the butts, and then take a few turns, tie off the thread with a couple of half hitches, and then snip these butts. I'll show you the way that I like to do it. I like to measure it. Now bring it up maybe 1/16 of an inch or so, and snip it straight across the eye, right off the tip of the eye. Now, drop that down, slide it back, so that that cut edge is just behind the eye. Now make the pinch, and you don't have to go back and trim the butts of the hair later. You can make that head, in fact, as small as you want, which actually depends on how close you can get the thread and make the pinch without going over those cut ends. As you can see here, I've got a small little head. I don't have to mess around with it. And this fly will not have a thread head the way I tie it. It will have just a thread collar. Now, I'm going to show you another way to secure that collar. I'm not going to use the half hitch. I'm going to use the whip finish. Make a half hitch as usual, and now let your bobbin hang. Notice the two sides here. The side that's towards me, actually right now it's the side that is coming off of my second finger, is what I will call the working side. The side that's dropping down to create the X, I will call the passive side. Create the half hitch and then pull up on the working side. Notice that it locks the knot into place. Now, if you just keep working that forward and keep the bulk of the loop in front, you keep adding turns to the half hitch. As you add those turns, you are creating a whip finish. Bring something up into there, in this case my scissors, and close the whip finish just as you do the half hitch. That is a whip finish, and that's the standard way to tie off a thread head, or in this case a thread collar. You can use 3 half hitches, or you can use the whip finish. When you feel comfortable with the half hitches, I suggest you try the whip finish. Now, add your head cement to the thread collar only, underneath, on the sides, all over, and that's it. That's the Elk Hair Caddis. Well, just to reinforce the theme, I'd like to say that I have done my best to make fly tying as clear and simple as it can be for you. I hope you enjoy it. I've never met anybody who took it up who didn't. And, you know, really, there are not that many serious fly fishermen who don't tie their own flies. You don't have to be a fly tyer to be a good fisherman, but frankly, I think you're missing out on a big part of our sport, a big part of the pleasure of our sport of fly fishing if you don't tie. So now, perhaps with my help, you will tie. Thank you. Our friend the wind. Oh, whoa! Yeah, just my hands moving. I still go with a good old metal bobbin, and the other thing I like about this bobbin over this bobbin over this bobbin, is that this bobbin, are you clear about which bobbin I'm talking about? About is wool. That's wool, yarn wool. The last and we have what they used to call rubber Barney rubble. And put the wire in the material holder. You will find that when you get then, did I make it clear? Whether your eyesight is good, or even if it's like mine, especially if it's like mine, that you use some kind of magnification. Partly because it really helps you see these tiny flies, and partly because it's just plain stylish. Now, start the thread just behind the eye.